Profilers. Do you have one? Is it the miracle that you had hoped? Should you buy one? Are they the holy grail of oboe reed making? This week's burning reed making topic is reed making machines. In preparation for the upcoming live and interactive Zoom read room sessions, I interview Adam Shapiro. By his own admission, he is crazy about reed making machines and has become a trusted source of information for many oboists. He joins the Dynamic Reed Makers this week. I'm Jeanine Krause from JK Double Reed Making and your host for the Oboe Reed Master series. I want you to hang out with the world's best reed making experts and find out how they solve burning reed issues. So follow the link to stay in the loop. Adam hails from the US West Coast. He teaches the art of reed making at Cambridge Makers in the United Kingdom and conducts frequent master classes in North America and in the UK and Europe. A seasoned performer on modern as well as Baroque oboe, Adam has performed with the Houston Symphony, Seattle Symphony, and New Jersey Symphony orchestras, as well as with the American Bach soloists. Adam maintains an active private studio and has been sharing his reed making knowledge generously through new videos, which he posts on social media. Welcome, Adam. There aren't many oboists who sit at the crossroads between modern long scrape reeds, modern short scrape reeds, and historical reeds. How did this come to be with you?
I have a very practical approach to reed making. Look, the bottom line is if you're a professional player, for many years I played second oboe in an orchestra, and you know as a second oboist, you just got to be able to play the low notes and to get the sound out. I have an incredibly practical approach to this, and when I teach reed making and when I think about my playing technique, I'm just looking for reeds that vibrate, that work, that drive the instrument properly. And yes, I'm an American player, and I've had sort of very American training, at least on the modern oboe side. I studied with Ray Still and Grover Schultz and John Mack. These also were very practical guys. Mr. Still, you know, he didn't really care too much about the reed. He would just say, he would go into the orchestra and he'd play on what he had, and he sounded pretty much the same no matter what. And, you know, Mr. Mack was a lot more, insane about things, as you know, and would make reeds every morning and was going really for a very specific thing. But when push came to shove, it was all about function. So I'm looking for reeds that vibrate, meaning I can peep them, they're not too hard. There's a big problem with European short scrape reeds many times. That they crow properly, that I can play high, I can play low, I can play loud, I can play soft, I can bend the pitch if I need to, up and down. And it's really all about function. What it sounds like, I'm not so concerned with. If a reed functions properly and drives the oboe, then that's great. It'll sound pretty good. I'm not terribly worried about making this beautiful, dark American sound. And in fact, if you hear me, if you know me, I don't know that I sound like an American. I sound sort of like the middle of the ocean somewhere. I have a slightly lighter sound than many American players. I think it sounds good. It's about function. So when I am making reeds, whether it's American long scrape, whether it's European short scrape, whether it's Baroque, it's all about function. It's all about enabling me to do musically what I need to do. The other thing was, if you're going to play both modern and Baroque oboe, as you do, you have to make some compromises. There are people who, you know, if you're only playing modern oboe, there are certain things you can get away with, because modern oboe, by definition, is a lot more stable instrument. If you're only playing Baroque oboe like Chris Palmetta, there are certain things that you'll gravitate to because you don't have to worry about having a flexible technique to do everything. I've made some very conscious compromises because I am, you know, on any given day, who knows what I'm going to be playing. It could be modern, it could be Baroque, it could be d'amore, it could be, most recently, classical oboe, which is really trying to wrap my head around that has been tough. What I'm really concerned about is having reeds that are fairly free, fairly flexible so that I can do what I need to do. And as you and I were actually talking about, my embouchure is pretty much the same on all of the instruments. And I have this big belief that you shouldn't be clamping. You shouldn't be holding things tight. You should have a fairly loose embouchure, fairly flexible. You shouldn't be afraid to open and close your mouth and voice the notes with the cavity, just like a recorder player. I'm also a recorder player, so that feeds in there too. And all of these techniques can be very useful. We talked a little bit, Jeanine and I, about this idea of on Baroque oboe, you want to be able to make the octaves. And I'm a big believer that if here's my upper and lower lip and here's the reed has a single contact point. And no matter what, you do need to, let's say, move things in and out, but the embouchure moves with the reeds. It never slides past at all. And if to make octaves in Baroque oboe, what I'm really doing is increasing the tension between the embouchure and the reed. And I find that I even do this on modern oboe, to tune notes to voice notes. So I'm pushing out with the embouchure at the same time that I'm sort of pushing in with the oboe and the reed. And this level of tension determines all kinds of things. And the thing is, though, if you make a super hard, super stable reed, whether you're an American long scrape player or whether you're a German short scrape player, you lose a lot of you lose the ability to do a lot of nuance. And so even when I make short scrape reeds, which I do for Demore and for modern core, I'm always thinking about making things that are flexible enough to accommodate the technique that I've got to allow me to play low, high, loud, soft, with staccato. And then the last thing I'm really looking for is a beautiful tone, which I think is much more in the head than it is in the equipment.
If you had to choose one of these scrape styles that you're most at home in, would you even be able to pick one?
Well, it depends on what I'm doing. For my modern oboe, which is Howarth, American long scrape, Brandon X Shaper, been using it for 40 years. I'm not going to change. It works for me. That's my, like the classic American scrape on a Kyorugi 2+ staple works great for that oboe. For many years, like a lot of other Americans, I played the Loré and the Loré AKs. And I can tell you that there are compromises with those oboes. It's the sum total, right? You have to take into account what oboe are you playing, who made it, what does it feel like, what staple will match that, and then the last thing is what scrape will work with that for the kind of music and technique that you have. I've got a couple of different oboes. Mostly I play the Howarth, but I have a Marigot too. It's what left over from my stint in Germany 30 years ago in Frankfurt, and it requires a different kind of a reed. It's a more flexible instrument. It requires something that's more stable. It requires a smaller diameter staple. You do what's needed for the particular setup that you've got. And it's always a challenge, especially with Baroque oboe, to figure out what's that recipe for the scrape. Again, I had a conversation with Chris Palametta this last summer. I'm primarily playing my Eichentoff oboes now, but if I were to play what he does, which is a Bradbury made by Randy Cook, I'd probably have a very different scrape and setup because those oboes want to respond differently. So I think you have to take what works for the instrument. My current set of stuff is for the Howarth and Marigot, I use an American scrape on either a 2 or a 2+ Kyorugi staple. For the Howarth, I use a slightly narrower shaper. For the Marigot, I use a slightly wider, like a Gilbert -2, something like this. Again, nothing that crazy, pretty standard. For Demore and core, I make a short scrape reed that is a little bit farther, scraped a little bit farther back than you would expect, but it's essentially a German short scrape reed. And my tips are a little long, sometimes longer than others. I have the fellow who is the Understanding the Oboe Reed. What is it? I've forgotten his last name, but he's made fun of me many times for having my tips to be too long. And okay, fine. It's whatever works for you. And my core reeds are very, very traditional German scrape, short scrape reed. And the reason I love that is because I don't use wires on them. I just allow the strength of the cane and the fact that the tension of the blades pressing on each other is holding the thing together. And for me, that works great. For me, that works great, especially on the Pushner English one.
So most people are pretty well in one camp or the other. Do you think that we have anything to learn from one another?
Oh yeah. Look, it's all about being practical. If I always try to listen to people who are in the battle. You know, if you can find somebody who's playing you like, you respect the way that they sound, and you respect the fact that they can just go do it. Because you and I both know you can do something in the practice room and then you get in the rehearsal and boy, is it different. And you think, oh, gee, I didn't even realize it was going to sound this way or respond this way. So find your mentors, find your colleagues that you really respect and see what they're doing. And you can always learn something from somebody. It can be very humbling. I'm 55 years old. I've been playing the oboe since I was 10. And you would like to think, oh, I'm done studying after university, but you're not. You're always studying. You're always learning. I learn from my students. We'll often, point out things, and I'll say, yeah, I didn't think about that. And they'll give you good feedback when something isn't working for them. And I'm a very I have been a professional orchestral player, a soloist. These days, I'm basically a teacher, university teacher. So I spend most of my time teaching these days. And it is actually really easy to get sloppy if you're not performing, if you're not in the battle. So you have to seek out those experiences, make sure that you expose yourself to public ridicule from every now and again, and talk to your colleagues who are really doing it every day. Get their feedback. There are some short scrape players who it's the obvious people. I love Albie Myers playing. He's a beautiful player. Although, to be honest, he doesn't really make a very traditional German scrape. He does his own thing. It's a little bit different. And his reeds are fairly flexible. I don't know if you've ever played them. They're not super hard. They're not like the rest of the Berlin guys who are playing on two popsicle sticks bound together, which I can't play. It's too stiff for me. And I think the key is whatever you do, make it work. Make it function.
Are there significant differences that you find between the different reed styles?
This is a tricky question. The answer is yes and no. If you were to be incredibly dogmatic and make a classic long scrape reed and a classic German short scrape and a classic French or English is a little closer to French, short scrape reed, yes, they respond differently. They require the angle to be different. The German reeds, you really have to you got to pick the oboe up. Schallrichter aft, right? You have to really pick the bell up. Because they're designed to take the air more directly. They just are. So if you follow that recipe exactly, yes, you have to change the technique. They respond differently. There's also the flip side of that. I can make a short scrape reed that responds and feels a heck of a lot like an American long scrape reed, just by the way I balance it. And I had this discussion with Lorenzo a couple of years ago, because he was like, oh, I want to see your reeds. And he tried a couple of my American scrape, and they happen to be done on very, very narrow shaper, like a Gilbert -1N, something super narrow. And I also don't take a lot out of the back, which is just me. And he was playing, and he's like, oh, plays just like a really good European reed. It doesn't really play any differently. So I'm going to say two things. You can be absolutely by the book, and yes, they'll feel different and sound different, and it requires a different approach. But you can make any scrape balanced and feel pretty much any way the way you want by the way you balance it. And again, it's back to function. If Lorenzo can pick up my American scrape reed, which is maybe not exactly an American scrape reed, and play and sound good, which he did, he's a great player. I think that speaks a lot, saying that the finishing is more important than the actual scrape pattern.
Are those rules the same regardless of the type of scrape? Are the basic universal physical principles?
Yeah, I think the basics are the same. And even the basic adjustments are the same. They're just slightly in different places. On an American reed, if you're not getting enough go, if you're not getting enough zip to the sound, it's because the transition between the heart and tip is too thick. Same thing on a short scrape reed. If you're not getting your low notes, it means there isn't enough out of the back. And it isn't enough at the sides of the spine in the U on a short scrape. It's the same thing. The locations are slightly different, but the zones do the same things. They might have different proportion. You know, on a classic European scrape reed, you want to make the heart thinner overall because the scrape is just shorter. On an American scrape, you have to make it thicker to balance. On European reeds, we don't leave the rails up all the way. Well, some people do, but I don't. On an American scrape, you really have to leave the rails, the bark, pretty much all the way, or the thing will just collapse. So there are some differences, but I think the universal rules and the universal feel, a well-balanced European reed shouldn't feel that much different. It's going to feel a little less flexible. Yeah, just does. It's going to feel a little stiffer just by the nature of the beast, but it should feel doable. You know, it's funny. I was talking with Daniel Bangham, who's a clarinet maker and pretty decent clarinetist, and he, for many years, wondered how the German players did it, because they do the thing with the twine, and they don't use ligatures, and they do this very funny. It's a different kind of a mouthpiece. And for years, he tried to kind of figure it out on his own, and he was like, I don't know how these guys play on it. It's awful. It's terrible. And then he was at a gig, and he just said, can I try your clarinet? And I think he picked up, I'm not sure who it was, a famous German player, lady who I won't say her name, and just played it. It's like, oh yeah, I see how you can get around on that. Because of it was the whole system, the whole package, the clarinet, the barrel, the way the ligature was tied, the way the reed was, the way the mouthpiece was. It's a system. And taking these things and like just taking, let's say, a classic German scrape and slapping it on a Loré, it's not the right approach. You have to go for the holistic approach, because the Loré isn't designed for that. It's designed for an American scrape. Just is. Or at least the C-bore is, at least.
Adam, what is the very first thing that comes to mind when I say reed making?
Oh, pain and boredom. Yeah, you know, the funny thing is, I love teaching reed making. I love, what is it? I forgot who said this. I love having, there's a very famous writer. I think it was, I love having written. I'm trying to remember who said that. Very famous woman American writer who said this. I love having written. I love having made reeds. I don't really love sitting here scraping things, which is why I got into profilers in the first place. I'm like, there's got to be something that makes this faster. And I do that. I make a basic reed and then finish it. And I'll make lots and lots and lots of reeds for the year and put them aside. I don't love sitting and scraping reeds.
What do you enjoy about reed making?
The puzzle solving. That's really it. It's really fun for me to kind of figure out why something doesn't work. And especially with the Baroque reeds and Baroque oboes, because they're all so different. And coming up with that recipe of the scrape and the staple and the oboe and the way that it plays is so different from instrument to instrument, and spending time to figure out what is that right combination. It's a lot of fun for me.
This is a new business model for you. You could hire yourself out to find that sweet.
For the sweet spot, yeah. Yeah, it can be hell. I had somebody contact me. I think actually you were on the thread. There was a young person in New Zealand who bought a second-hand oboe, and for the life of him, just couldn't figure out how to make a reed for this thing. It's made by a young American maker who does something very, very different than everybody else. And whether it's good or bad, who am I to say? It works for him, yeah? And I can tell you, I've heard this guy play, and he's got chops. He can play really well. So it's like, okay, he's figured out something that works for him. He's even made an oboe. Basically, my answer was, call the guy who made the oboe, because he's figured out the staple and the reed dimensions. And if you really want to spend 6 months experimenting, you can, but it's a very laborious process to figure out a new setup for a different Baroque oboe, because they're so radically different. Take advantage. With modern, it's pretty easy. Someone's figured it out for something. There's always a recipe that seems to work best for people. And even for the common Baroque instruments, I mean, you work with Kuba, right? And you know it works for his horns. I've worked with Sam Dalton. I know it works for his horns. Chris has worked with Randy Cook. He knows what works for his horns. They're all different, and they're all equally valid, and there are lots of different ways to get to the same point. It's just the road you choose. But of course, best to start with what the maker recommends.
I never had luck with that. I always had to move away from it very quickly, but my first Baroque oboe lessons were with Matthew Peaceman.
Oh yeah, Matthew, I loved him.
And he
he's a
never
dear person.
never did anything by the book, and I've never managed to do anything by the book either.
I inherited a couple of his oboes, and
I have one too.
I think of him every time I play it. So.
Yeah. What is the biggest mistake that students make with their reeds?
Well, I mean, there are lots of them. I think mostly they just don't go far enough, that they're afraid. I think that's the main thing. I was teaching, I did a couple of master classes at University of Colorado recently. University of Northern Colorado with Tim Gocklin. And I spent some time with everybody in the studio doing some reed making lessons. And every single one of them is afraid to ruin the reed. And I'm very much like, you know what, it's just a piece of wood. If you mess it up, so what? You'll make another one. But students, I think, because they're very slow at it, they have a lot of fear. So they'll often leave everything too heavy. They won't finish the tips because they're afraid of ruining things. And then they'll bring them to their teacher to say, can you please fix this for me? I think the main thing is just to be brave and just do it. And if you break it, so what? I have a policy with my own students of, if they ruin a reed, I'll give them a reed if they need something to play on.
That's a sweet deal.
And it doesn't happen that often. I mean, it happens a lot at the beginning, but then as they get better, the yield is better, and I'm usually able to fix what they do. But I'd rather have them ruin the reed by doing too much and learning something than by coming to me and saying, I don't know what to do now. I think there's a lot to be gained from experimenting. And it's just a piece of cane. It's not a holy relic, right? Just do it.
Do you have a set of formal or informal absolute reed truths?
Yes. My number one reed truth is the blank must seal. If the blank doesn't seal, do not bother. There is no point. You are never going to make a good reed out of a blank that does not seal. It's like American baseball. Only the Americans will get this. The errors are cumulative. So if you make errors early in the game, they just get worse and worse and worse. So if you're gouging, do it right. If you're tying, if you're shaping, do it right. Don't have little nicks on the sides because leaks later are going to get in your way. If you're tying, make sure it's tied straight and it's on the ellipse of the tube and it's sealing properly and it's at the right place and the waist isn't too big, because again, a blank that's tied improperly won't even work on the profiler. The profilers are great for showing you where you've messed up in your blank tying, because an improperly tied blank won't sit on the plaque on the profiler correctly. It'll just crack, or you'll do it and it'll be completely uneven. It'll be wonky because one side is pressing more than the other. So basically the truth is you've got to do all this. It's not great advice, right? Do all the steps right. Have good cane, gouge properly, or at least find a good source that you can trust that's properly gouged, shape properly so that the sides don't leak, make a good blank, tie properly. All of those things really, really add up, and it's got to seal. It must absolutely seal.
I'm about to market a German language workshop to teach exactly that. Could you say that same thing in German so that I can use that bit to market my course?
Oh boy. I'm going to back off from that one. I'll practice my bad German, and next time we talk, I'll say it in German, but not right now.
Because that's like the best testimonial for signing up for this course ever. Because it's the fundamentals I'm going to be working them to set those up, because I feel like a reed makes itself if you can get that set up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to seal. Just do all the right stuff.
Just do it. Adam, what's your reed making superpower?
Okay. Well, my reed making superpower is I am the blank master. Um, I am a retying, for better or worse, I can tie blanks really fast. I don't know, 45 seconds? Boom. Less than a minute. No problem.
Freehand?
Freehand. I have a bench motor, and I also have a mandrel that I've mounted in the bench motor. If I'm going to sit there, and if I have to wrap 50 blanks for a festival or something, okay, I'll use the bench motor, but usually I just do it by hand. I use parafilm. I tie the cane together with some wax film or plastic film. Helps me.
So this is going to be our last question.
Sure.
How important do you think good reed making skills are for you, the success in your performing career?
Well, I think they're vital, and I think they're connected. So I'll give you the answer that, well, here's what I think. I think that the two go together, that the better reed maker you are, the better player you are, and that progress in one area or the other pushes progress in the other. If your reeds get better, your technique and your control gets better over time. If your control and technique and the way you breathe and the way that your mechanics work get better, you demand more of your reeds, and you make your reeds better because you need to. And they both feed into each other, and they are inseparable. I would love it. Well, I don't know if I would love it, because I like playing with the toys and all the tools. But if I could buy reeds that just worked right out of the box, I'd do it. You know, who wouldn't, right? Just to have some spares. And also, to be perfectly honest, I do that. There's an American reed maker where I buy a couple reeds every few months just to have something in my box, just in case I'm desperate. Because even I have drive spells where I can't make anything. You know, everybody goes through that. It's like you're on a streak and you've made 30 great reads, and then you can do nothing for a month. Nothing usually works for whatever reason.
Adam, thank you so much for taking this time. I've enjoyed this interview very much. We look very much forward to our sessions with you.
Great. I'm really happy to be doing this. I'm actually tickled pink that you asked me to do this. So thank you. And you know, I just love teaching. I think everybody's got callings in life. I'm actually finding my career as a teacher a heck of a lot more satisfying than sitting and playing second oboe all the time. So I'm very happy to do it.
Thank you.